Best episode yet. Best episode yet, man. I love this series. Can I just start every single episode review saying that? Because I'll tell you, man, it was so hard during the popularity of this series manga not to just go in myself and experience what I had heard everybody raving about, because I knew, based on everything that I had heard and the things that people were telling me, that the story here, the characters, the vibe, the pacing, everything would be exactly the kind of stuff that appeals to me in fiction. But I waited. I'm an anime guy, so I knew that if this story was as great as I was picturing in my head, I knew that I would enjoy it more if I waited to experience it in animation. And so far, man, these 4 goddamn episodes that have been released so far, they are meeting my every expectation that I had for this series. Hello everybody, I am Phenom Sage, and welcome back to another Chainsaw Man episode review. Today we are going to be talking about episode 4, Rescue. And look, I know that the past few episodes I have had nothing but praise for the production and the animation. This is clearly an all-star team producing one of the most consistently visually appealing anime series of this year. And specifically, I know that I have praised the action. Last episode had some great action in there. There was some great action in episode 1. It's not like the series was ever hurting for bigger and better. And yet in last week's episode review, I specifically mentioned that I knew that we hadn't seen the best of what Chainsaw Man would offer in this series. I knew that there would be even bigger and greater things to come. After this week though, I'm not sure if I can keep saying that, because goddamn dude, the animation, the production, even the goddamn sound design, every technical facet of this week's episode was on an even higher level than what we've seen previously, and I'm wondering how many more episodes like this we'll actually get in this season. And there are a few key reasons for all of this happening and being the way that it is, but unlike last week where I mentioned how the production had a lot of interesting, unique aspects to it that I didn't think an average viewer would really pay attention to in contrast to the first 2 episodes, this episode, on the other hand, I absolutely know for a fact that your average viewer is going to watch this episode and they're going to say, why does the action suddenly look so much better? Why is the lighting so much better? Why does the direction and the framing and the use of sound and color feel so much more refined? And there is an answer to all of these questions, but I have to make it clear, again, this series was never hurting for this kind of quality. I gushed about how great the previous episodes looked and felt, and yet a lot of this episode's quality can once again be traced back to a single man who is considered one of the leading figures in the animation industry. Tatsuya Yoshihara is a name that you might recognize as the director of Black Clover, and whatever your opinions on that series may be, it's no secret that he practically saved a sinking ship of a production and managed to turn it into a project that cultivated immense animation talent. And beyond his direction on that series, if you just look at some of the other animated works of his, he's someone that just clearly understands what makes good-looking animation, and more specifically, he's someone who knows how to craft insanely good-looking action. And so the hype was pretty high when Chainsaw Man announced that this was the man who would be the one to be the action director for the entire series. So when you get the action director for your series to come in and just direct and storyboard an entire episode, it makes sense that that would be the episode to really pop off when it comes to just pure action sakuga and incredible storyboarding throughout. It also helps that you have these generational animation talents like Keiichiro Watanabe, Yen BM, Toshiyuki Sato, just an absolutely insane lineup of animators bringing this episode to life. And it truly shows, man. The action in this episode is at its most frantic, dynamic, chaotic, any number of synonyms you want to use to convey how absurd what I was watching on screen actually was. But what surprised me more about this episode is that all of this immense skill and talent also translated beautifully to all of the quieter and slower parts of the episode as well. In fact, if you take out that beginning action scene of the episode, this is a very, very ambient, methodically paced episode with the focus just really setting the tone with Denji Aki and Power's characters, and I absolutely loved that. I can't imagine any other 12 episode shonen series getting an adaptation where the team just spends an entire 2 minutes of the episode just in near complete silence while Aki makes coffee and reads a newspaper, and just all of these other mundane daily routines that just set the mood of the scene so nicely. And even better, it's a really smart way of establishing the mood so that you can immediately break it when Power ends up showing there to live as well. It's also just really efficient and organic ways of characterizing your group. You learn things about all three of them here just through this little sequence, and I really appreciated how it was communicated in this fun and interesting way. I learned that Aki is very conscious about his appearance. Denji naturally values all kinds of food and is embracing a level of hygiene that he didn't have before. Power is a fiend, so she naturally doesn't care about any of that. Just a lot of fun comedy and moments that also act as a way to further understand the characters and their budding relationships. One thing this episode practically hits over the head with a hammer, though, is the theming and the messaging behind Denji's overall motivation and dream. Because I myself have brought this up in every single episode review so far. I think it's always been pretty clear what they were doing with Denji's character and his motivation, but I have seen some people who I think are looking at the series in a more surface level kind of way, who are getting kind of annoyed with Denji's character and his nonstop proclamations of his goal. Like, what, he just wants to touch some boobs? I mean, so do I, but it's getting annoying watching him prioritize it so prominently and yelling about it every 5 minutes. But you have to understand that touching boobs is only one side of Denji's dream, and in case it wasn't clear, what it's meant to kind of represent in the story is this idea of Denji wanting this normal life that he's had taken from him his entire childhood. He wants to make friends, he wants to live in a normal household, he wants to eat toast with every spread and condiment that he can find. These are just normal things that he finds pleasure in, and the one that he's focusing on now is he wants to feel some tits, man. He's even said in one of the past episodes that actually getting a girl is probably too high of a dream for him right now, but boobs are something attainable, and you would assume that by the end of this episode, he has attained that dream. And I absolutely love in the fight with the Leech Devil how this devil is talking about how stupid Denji's dream is compared to the dream that she and the Bat Devil had about just eating every human in the world. This very generically broad, ambitious dream. More on that later. And consistently throughout the series, pretty much everyone has scoffed at Denji's dream. They just don't get why it's so important to him, and they assume that he's just speaking nonsense and goofing around. And I love Denji's line in this fight where he says, "This is a goddamn dream battle then. If I kill you, then that means that your dream, this broad, generically ambitious dream, was weaker than just fondling a tit." And touche, man, too fucking shay. I am loving where they're taking Denji's character right now, and I love how it kind of takes on this meta angle of commentary about how just because his goal isn't as big or grand as the goals of other shonen protagonists, that doesn't make it any less important or interesting. The only thing I'm wondering at this point is, like I've mentioned in the previous episodes, if there is this theme of always wanting more, of never being satisfied no matter how much you achieve, then I'm wondering what Denji's goal will be now that he has finally touched some boobs. Is the next goal just a relationship? Is it going to be more superficial, like just losing his virginity? I have no idea, but I suspect we will start seeing whatever it is, or at least signs of it, in the next episode. There is one other detail in this episode that I wanted to draw attention to. Obviously, there's a slew of new characters brought into the midst, all of them seemingly a part of this same Devil Hunter division that Aki is a part of. I don't really have much to say about any of them right now, to be honest. They didn't really get any screen time. I'm looking forward to seeing more of Himeno. I also know Kobeni from the memes online, so bringing those characters into the midst should be a fun time. We also see Aki use his power in this episode, which I think was actually a reveal about how devil hunters enter contracts with devils to use their powers. That was pretty goddamn cool, although I am questioning why the fox devil is so powerful, especially that much more powerful than the leech or the bat devil, when really, in real life, who the hell is scared more of a fox than they are of leeches or bats? I don't know about all that. Maybe that has to do something more with Japanese mythology. I know foxes play a part in that. Either way, I'll roll with it regardless, but none of those are the things that I wanted to bring attention to. The thing that I actually wanted to bring attention to was an interesting line that Aki says to Makima when he's reporting on the entire situation that went down with the two devils. He specifically says that there were no traces of gun flesh in either the bat or leech devil's heads. And the word gun happened to be capitalized in the middle of this sentence. Maybe that's just a Crunchyroll thing, but there's some pretty natural assumptions here that you can make about what they are talking about. Guns don't typically have flesh, man, and gun isn't typically the kind of word that you capitalize in the middle of a sentence. So keeping those things in mind, I assume what they are talking about here is a gun devil. And like we were talking about before, if we're talking about devils with the power that inspire the most fear, I was mentioning last episode about how I wondered which devil powers would be the most powerful based on how widespread the fear of it is. I would say guns are pretty high up there, maybe top 3, maybe even the top 1 thing that people are most afraid of throughout the world. And if that is the case, if it is in that level of fear, and that does translate to the level of power it has, then I would assume what they're talking about here is this specific mission to target and either kill or capture this most powerful devil for the sake of their organization. I think it's also worth noting that in the opening, you can also see this long line of bullets waving around in the air, which, to be fair, you could just wave off as symbolic imagery, which I did after watching that opening the first time. But after this episode, I would assume that probably has something to do with this gun devil in theory. The real question is what they actually intend to do with it, because the way it's being set up here makes me think that this might be some kind of overarching goal, not just to kill this thing, but to somehow weaponize it like they mentioned in last week's episode. Lots of exciting stuff ahead, I'm sure. Before I close this out though, I do want to mention a few things that were brought up to me about my thoughts on last week's episode, and either some interesting observations I heard, or just corrections to stuff I was thinking or just being an idiot about. For one, like I've kind of been basing all of my thoughts previously on so far, this concept of devils getting their power from fear, their abilities being powered by how feared they are throughout the world, that is not just symbolic. That actually is the power system of these devils in this world, which again raises some questions about why things like Aki's Fox Devil is so powerful. I assume there's other aspects to their power to consider as well, but it's definitely good to know for the future and good to know to base your thoughts on. Another thing is how I was mentioning last episode, it being kind of dumb how Power and Denji were getting in trouble for taking care of a devil because it was overstepping boundaries with civilian hunters. I said, okay, fine, but if nobody was there taking care of the scene when a devil is wreaking havoc, then why are we getting in trouble for their lack of responsibility? Well, it turns out I'm actually blind and deaf because there is actually this small scene of a civilian hunter in a phone booth holding a samurai sword and explicitly requesting backup. I feel like a goddamn idiot, but maybe I was just too focused on what Power was doing or something. What's done is done. One world-building detail that I feel less ashamed about missing because it was ultimately a very small detail that was pointed out to me afterwards is the fact that the Soviet Union still exists in this world. Now, it hasn't really been made clear what time period Chainsaw Man actually takes place in. You would assume it's more modern, but at the same time, I can't really recall any telling signs like cell phones or modern TVs. Maybe I'm just not remembering something, but the fact that the Soviet Union still exists in this world may or may not be important in the future of the story, but regardless, what it tells you is that this is some kind of alternate universe story in the same way that something like Watchmen is. The last thing that I wanted to mention is in response to what I was saying about Denji's character last week. I was wondering what his moral compass was like based on some of the things that he was doing during that fight with the Bat Devil, because the impression that I always got of his character was that underneath that kind of delinquent exterior, Denji is a good guy with a good heart that is clearly going out of his way to help and protect people. And yet at one point he straight up throws a car with a dude inside of it with no hesitance or trepidation. And what was made clear to me about this scene after the fact is that Yeah, dude, Denji doesn't care about adult males. He'll protect women, he'll protect children, but he will not go out of his way to protect dudes. And the more I thought about it, the more I actually liked this aspect of his character, because it does reflect what he's been going through his entire life. He's basically been given hell his entire childhood by these adult men, either by the Yakuza or by his father. So I did think that was worth mentioning because I do find that to be an interesting and telling aspect of his character. Overall though, another incredible episode of Chainsaw Man. At this point, I genuinely am just wondering how long they can keep this kind of quality up. Not even just in terms of production and animation, but just narratively. If there's ever going to be any missteps or lulls in the story that have me saying, you know what, that episode wasn't that great. I sure hope not, man, because so far, we are 4 out of 4 in this series, and I just can't wait to see what is next. Let me know in the comments or in the Discord server linked below the like button what you guys thought about this week's episode. Surely, this is the episode that nobody will have complaints with, right? Surely nobody, including those source readers, will have anything negative to say about how they handled this episode. Am I right? Thank you all so much for watching. I love you. And I will see you in the next video.